I'm recording my homily for the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time in 2020, and Lent is approaching. Lent is only like 2 weeks away. But also, I've been really struggling to get my homilies recorded. I've missed a number of Sundays since Christmas, and it's just becoming more of a struggle with everything going on. But I'm going to try and keep doing it, keep the discipline going. So last 2 weeks I was actually on vacation, and where I was on vacation I really didn't have internet access per se, and I didn't bring my camera. So I went on a 4,400 mile road trip from Marysville, Washington, all the way down to the south end of Baja California in Mexico. And it was a wonderful experience. It was a great adventure. But in the midst of that, I didn't get any of my homilies recorded. So, back now though. All right. So this Sunday, the message that I think is being conveyed in the Gospels is very simple. It's very simple. When we live our faith publicly, that's where fruit is born, right? In the sense of, and this is not to take away from anything else. This is not to take away from our quiet prayer, our private prayer, the things that we do in private. But if it's not happening publicly, then there's something terribly wrong with our faith if we're not living it out publicly. And so in the first reading in the Gospel, it's talking about the relationship between living a life of charity and spirituality publicly, not showing off, but living it publicly, and then the fruits that come from that in our world. So this is also really a challenge for us, again, to attack that one lie that can come back to us, that my faith is something private. You know, I've said this before. I don't know how many times I've talked to families when I'm meeting with them to discuss a funeral for one of their loved ones, and I'll ask them and I'll say, tell me something about their spiritual life, something they loved about their spiritual life. And almost always they'll say, well, their spiritual life was very private to them. We don't know. And there's a disaster in that. And then it makes sense why the kids, the family, leaves the faith. Because it's like they hid that which was supposed to be out in the open. I suppose I could talk about why that is. Why do we do that sometimes? But I'm not going to do that today. So I'm going to keep it simple today. Just talking about this nature of being a light to the nations. I love the gospel. It says, he says, you are a light. You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Jesus, now there's times Jesus will say, well, I am the light of the world. But he's saying here to you, you are the light of the world. He also says, you are the salt of the earth. This is not an accusation. This is not something bad. This is something so positive, so good, and yet so overwhelming, right? You are a light to the world. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You are the salt of the earth. You are meant to make the faith come alive in your community. You, right? Now, sometimes if I say this at Mass, somebody could easily be there sitting there and saying, well, that's not me. I'm not even living in the state of grace. I don't go to confession. I'm just going through the motions. Now, most people wouldn't say that to themselves, but if they would really go deep, say, yeah, I'm just kind of going through. So he's not talking to me. He's like, yes, he is. I think there's so many times in our lives where if we really sat down and met with Jesus face to face, we would be so overwhelmed by the ways that he wants us to live our faith publicly. How much he wants to entrust to us. Okay. When I was down in La Paz in Baja California, which is one of their bigger cities, I went to Mass at a church called the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's a really, really big church. It's probably the size of our cathedral, and it's really beautiful. It's simple but very beautiful. They've just restored the inside, or I should say renovated it. It's done very, very well, very simple. But when I was at Mass, actually I went to 2 Masses. The first Mass I came in a little bit late, and so I just sat in the back, right? When the second Mass started, I went up to the front. But I sat in the back, and as I was back there, just loving it, just enjoying it, just being there, just to pray. When the priest got up to the altar, right? So the priest gets up to the altar to do the consecratory prayers over the bread and the wine. Well, he has an altar server holding a phone with a flashlight on so that he can see the book. Now, I didn't really notice the church was that dark, but I was sitting in the back where there was a lot more light. But up front, the priest couldn't see the book that he was reading from. Now, as I moved up to the front the next Mass, I'm looking up in the dome that's above, and there's no lights. There's no lights. There's a bunch of windows, so it's dependent on the sun, the natural light. And in La Paz, that's usually not an issue, right? They get a lot of sun there. But that day it was cloudy. And I thought, wow, if they want to install lighting, that's going to be a hassle. They're going to have to run wiring, and they're going to have to figure out how the lights would be. And they're going to want to do it so that you don't have these big ugly lights up there that are just a distraction, because it was really beautiful what they did with the ceiling. And I was thinking, that's kind of like the spiritual life, in that if we're not the light to the world, then we have to install the wiring. We have to install the lighting system, right? That's what Jesus wants us to do. There has to be something very intentional about this process of becoming a light to the world. It doesn't just happen, nor does it just say, well, he'll do it, right? Father will do it. That's not how it works. Especially the role of the laity is to be out in the world. The role of the priest is to minister to the people as they come for the sacraments and these things, but in its essence, the role of the laity is to be out in the world, to be a light to the world. But it's installing all that wiring to be able to shine the light, right? And so it's intentional. So that's the first thing in my homily is, you have to intentionally want to be a light to the world. You have to choose it, or else it won't happen. Okay? All right. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is something I think that could easily become misconstrued, and that is the difference between showing the faith and showing off the faith. Showing off, in the end, is to get attention, right? I'm going to show off to other people so that I can get attention. And it's all rooted in insecurity. But showing the faith is I become almost invisible because people can then see God. That's what showing the faith is, being a light to the world. I love the very last line in the gospel, and it says, so your light must shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and give glory to your heavenly Father. So when they see our good deeds, when they see us living our faith publicly, they may give glory to God the Father. So we become, in some sense, invisible because people see deeper in what we're doing. They see our Heavenly Father. And so we're showing God. We're not showing off, we're showing God, right? To be able to recognize the difference between the two. False humility is when somebody says, well, I'm just going to live my faith privately, right? I'm not going to show off my faith. And it's like, no, you have to show your faith. You have to show it to the world so that it can bear fruit, so it can bear fruit. All right. So just something thinking about, as I was thinking about this, is a lot of Catholics still pray the rosary. especially, the older generation. And I think it's a very important prayer. I'm not going to say the rosary is the only thing we have, right? Because we have so much more when it comes to the spiritual life. But I do believe it's essential because even the younger generation, they don't have a clue how to pray the rosary. And in terms of just learning the mechanics of the rosary, it's very simple. But they don't even know how to do that, much less meditate and contemplate and go deeper in prayer and Lectio Divina and all these things, and how to participate really well in Mass and really use the sacrament of confession really well. They don't even know how to pray the rosary. So I was thinking, just the example of seeing somebody walking down the street with a rosary in their hand. They're not showing off, they're just out for a walk, but they're praying the rosary. So I thought, so when you're at work, most people at work, they get a lunch hour, right? Or a lunch half hour. And some of that time could be used to just go out on the campus, wherever you're at, wherever you're working. If you work for a big company, you go out on the campus somewhere. Or if is near a neighborhood or some side streets, or maybe there's a park there, and you say, you know what, part of my lunch hour, I'm going for a walk. I'm going to pull out my rosary. I'll let it hang down next to me. People can see it. I'm not showing it off, but I'm going to pray the rosary for part of my lunch hour. Sometimes, you want to be careful of that. We're not showing off here, but at the same time, to not be afraid to live one's faith out there. Because some Catholic might be driving by and it's like, ooh, I should do that sometime. I should pray the rosary, right? On my lunch hour. What a great idea. Those types of things is when we become a light to the world. Is we bring something intentional into the world. Right? We have to choose to do that. Not showing off, though, right? When I was driving back home from Mexico and I crossed the border in Mexicali and I'm going back to San Diego, I had to go back to San Diego. Well, as I crossed the border, and almost immediately as I crossed the border, I'm driving along, and alongside the freeway, there's this really big building on fire, and it was billowing just this black smoke. It was some industrial place, right? It was a huge fire, though. I mean, you could see it from miles away. And I ended up driving right by us, right by the freeway. I kid you not, 10 minutes later, I'm driving on the freeway, and there's a car on the side of the road, a newer car on the side of the road, just in flames. I mean, the whole thing's on fire. So obviously it's just happened, right? Because I'm driving by, and the fire engines are just getting there. Well, I'm driving along for a little ways, and then I passed this really bad accident, right? I got stuck in traffic. It took me 5 hours to go from San Diego through Los Angeles. Well, a little while later after that accident, I come across a pickup truck that's in the middle of the freeway on fire. And the paramedics were just getting there. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Did I just come back to Afghanistan? What is going on here? It's like chaos. I'm going back to Mexico where it's halfway normal. The thing is, the reason I bring this up, I saw a lot of firefighters that day in action, right? I saw a lot of police officers, state patrol in action. I saw paramedics in action. Like 6 different events happened that day. And not once, as they were doing everything they were doing in front of thousands of people on the freeway, on these freeways, right? Not once did I see them showing off. They were just doing their job, but they were doing it publicly. I think there's something there for us. We do our job as disciples. We're not afraid to do it publicly, to be out in the world. Now, I'm not giving you lots of examples today. We're getting ready for Lent. Lent is coming up, and I'm going to give you a lot of examples. But not today. Today is just to get this to sink in, right? Cannot live my faith just privately. It has to be out there in the world. When I was on my trip, I did a lot of camping, and so I was camping in a tent. for part of it. And I had my Mass kit. I like to celebrate Mass every day. There was a problem, though. I didn't have a table. So where I was camping in different places, but I didn't have a table. I didn't bring one with me. I didn't have something that I could just set up and celebrate Mass on. You know, I can be pretty creative about that kind of stuff when I'm on vacation or I'm somewhere else. But I had nothing. I didn't even have a big rock. So at one point, I'm talking to my mom on the phone, and my mom's asking me if I'm celebrating Mass every day. And I said, well, I was at this mission. I went to visit some of the missions down there. And I went to visit the mission, and when I was at the mission, I went to Mass. But no, I haven't been doing Mass. I don't have a table. And she's like, well, you'll figure it out. You know, you just need to figure this out, right? So for the first time in my priesthood, I celebrated Mass on the ground. I set up my corporal, I set up the chalice, I set up on the ground in my tent. And I'm not necessarily using this as an example of doing something publicly, but being out in the world, I want to give this as an example of something, how it changed me a little bit, right? So at first I thought this was going to be like disrespectful to God, celebrating Mass on the ground. But as I did it, it became something very powerful for me. One of the images that came to me, and I know this is a very different scenario, but one of the images that came to me is the cardinal in Vietnam a number of years ago was imprisoned there by the Communist Party for a number of years. So the bishop there was imprisoned for a number of years. And there's a story about him when he's in prison that I guess they smuggled in a little bit of wine. Maybe they let him have a little bit of wine. I don't know. But to celebrate Mass, you have to have wine and you have to have bread. And so he would pour just like a drop of wine in the palm of his hand. And then he would have a little piece of bread in his hand. And then his hand became his altar because he had nothing else. And so he would celebrate Mass from memory, the prayers, just from memory. He would celebrate Mass in the palm of his hand. Now, there were other people in that prison. There were other priests, I'm sure, in that prison. There were laity in the prison. But I guarantee you, when people heard him, when they saw him celebrating Mass that way, it would move them. It would inspire them. It was something, he wasn't showing off, but there was just something so powerful about that example that he would set for others. And even now, as he wrote about it in his biography, the inspiration that shares with other people, he was not showing it off, but just talking about how he lived his faith in that moment. Seeing all those firefighters at work, I was inspired by that. They're saving lives, they're helping people, right? For people to see us as disciples out in the world is so critical. Okay? Today is the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes. And so you have the story of Saint Bernadette, a very, very young girl who has these images, these apparitions that she receives of Our Lady in France, right? And there's this time where some people are accusing her of fabricating it, of just making it up, because she was the only one who could see it. But Our Lady made it happen so that it was public. And Saint Bernadette was very humiliated sometimes by this. She was called before these, almost like an inquisition, before these bishops, and they're interviewing her, and they're trying to break her down because they think she's lying. And this is all being done in front of others, but it becomes such an incredible moment and example of being a light to the world, being the salt of the earth. She was a simple peasant girl, and yet she becomes something so powerful for the church, right? All right. God bless you all. I hope to be more consistent with my homilies and recording them. And let's get ready for Lent, okay? All right, God bless.